Okay, Tracy has lived and worked and studied in more than 4 continents, and today she's the head of business relations and corporate strategy at Heroes Group, and she'll be moderating this panel. Big applause for Tracy.
Well, thank you, Rob. Now, as you can see, I'm joined by 2 wonderful individuals to my left. The first being David Johnston, Managing Director at Yeoman's Capital, and Charles Hoskinson, CEO and founder of IOHK, but also known as the founder of Cardano and, of course, a co-founder of Ethereum. Thank you for joining me today.
Good to be here. It's good to have both Texas and Colorado in the house.
And California.
Well,
you guys can leave the union at any time.
Well, as Rob already mentioned, our topic today is why Switzerland rocks the crypto world. So what I would like to know right off the bat is what initially encouraged some of the early movers to settle in Switzerland before Crypto Valley is the Crypto Valley that we know today existed. So I think, Charles, you with the Ethereum Foundation settled in Zug well before Zug was on the map as a sort of leader in the blockchain space. So what drew you to Zug, of all places?
So actually, I was the guy who made the decision to have Ethereum in Switzerland. We had 2 options, Singapore and Switzerland. So after 2014 in Miami, I had this lovely panel here with David. It was a lot of fun. We said, wow, people really like Ethereum, so we have to make a decision. Where the heck are we going to incorporate? And so we started just talking to people. And ironically, it was, of all people, Johann Gevers who recommended that we come to Switzerland. So we knew Chris Odom from Open Transactions, and he said, you got to talk to Johann. He's like, Switzerland is the best place ever. So Vitalik really liked Singapore, and he was fascinated with that. He was learning Chinese at the time. And I said, all right, you look into Singapore, and I'll look into Switzerland. And so we called Johann, and he said, oh, it's the most amazing country. It's totally decentralized. Everything is wonderful here. The food is good. Coffee's $11 a cup. You'll love it. And I said, wow, okay. So I called up Mihai, who was another one of our co-founders, and he was living with, of all people, Amir Taki in a squat in Califu, which didn't even have running water. And I said, could you guys like somehow sneak into Switzerland? I don't know if they'll let you in, but sneak in and tell me all about it. Let me know if it's a good country for crypto. And Mihai came, and he was taken around by Herbert Sturchy and Johann and the rest of the gang, and they gave them just a wonderful horse and pony show. So Mihai called me up and he said, this is the most amazing country ever, you have to come. So I bought a one-way ticket, and I lived in Zug, and we basically just started talking to MME partners. We were their first cryptocurrency client. They made kind of a nice business out of that. And I got to meet Luca and Herbert. We lived with Herbert for a little while in his 1-bedroom apartment, which was fun for 9 people. It was unbelievable. If you know Herbert, these are the things he said. But a little by little, we just got to know a little bit about Swiss culture. Like, for example, when we got our tax ruling at Zug, the mayor of Zug said, welcome to Switzerland, don't make it our problem, which was fun. But what we found was it was a great environment to do business. We found that everything that we needed was a negotiation, and when I was getting things done, it was always a situation where they'd ask, well, what's in it for Switzerland? And if you could answer that question, then you'd get something done quickly. And that's just like the opposite of the United States, where you have to hire like legions of lawyers to defend yourself against the evil government, and they'll never actually talk to you or tell you anything. So it was just such a pleasure and such a joy. And there were certainly a lot of challenges, like getting bank accounts and other things like that. Entrepreneurs still run with this. But overall, I'd say of all the European nations I've ever done business in, Switzerland's been the most enjoyable.
Very interesting. Well, of course, in the meantime, the Crypto Valley has grown to incorporate some an extensive area, including Vaduz and Basel and a lot of other cities. But my question is, with sort of the network that has grown and what it is today, what makes the Crypto Valley attractive for blockchain entrepreneurs and for startups today?
Well, I'm personally moving to Crypto Valley, so what brought me is effectively that network effect. That began with Ethereum and really brought all of those foundations and protocols here. That gave you the regulatory base. Switzerland went on to pass all this regulation that made it very clear what type of tokens were utility or security or commodity or payment token. And that's a clarity you just can't get in the United States or in a lot of other jurisdictions. So entrepreneurs can only operate where they know what the rules are. And here the rules are very clear, and that's just empowered people to expand. Like you said, it's come a long way from just Zug, right? You know, there's amazing things happening in Liechtenstein. Their blockchain act just went live on January 1st. Congratulations to them. That gives you passporting into the rest of the EU. So Switzerland is your base for the world, and Liechtenstein right next door is, I think, an extension of Crypto Valley. And so that network effect, I think, is going to continue to bring the best protocols and the best projects here in Switzerland going forward.
And there's a great labor market here, too. I mean, that's the big difference between an offshore center like Barbados or Cayman Islands or something like that. They'll let you have a shingle and you can have a mailbox, but at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to hire a PhD from ETH Zurich there who wants to live there. So you can get great German engineers, great Swiss engineers, great French and Italian engineers, and it's very easy to get them to work and relocate to Switzerland. Quality of living is the best in Europe here. It's also one of the prettiest countries around. I live in Colorado, and we have kind of similar mountains. And so every time I look around, I say, wow, this reminds me of home. So it's a great mixture of regulatory clarity, wonderful professional services, good relationships, and a nice pool of diverse labor. And also the taxes aren't too bad either. So it's a good mixture of these things. It's hard to find a jurisdiction like that.
Now you mentioned an interesting word, one that's almost viewed as a dirty word at times, mailbox, because I think one of the criticisms that is levied at the Crypto Valley is you have a lot of mailbox companies that have a mailbox but aren't actually physically present. So then my question to you is, what is the benefit that actual presence in the Crypto Valley offers to active participants? Is it sort of what you make of it, or do you think there's a real advantage to actually being on location? I mean, you, David, now have decided to make the move to Crypto Valley. I'm assuming then that would mean that you're quite enthusiastic about the benefits of actually being here.
I am convinced that this is the best deal flow in the world, right? And it's not just about having a mailbox. I think that would have been a legitimate criticism in maybe 2014, but it started with mailbox. And then you need to have your board meetings here. And oh, by the way, for substance, you really need your CTO and your intellectual property developed in Switzerland. And, well, he needs a team of engineers around him. And little by little, more and more, you had a reason to build the team here, to really have the project based here. And for access, having those early stage projects hosted the Crypto Valley VC and other incubators that have launched, that's when you want to get involved. As an investor, I don't want to miss the seed stage. I don't want to miss the Series A. Yeah, maybe they'll eventually get to the US jurisdiction when they have enough money to get over the regulatory hurdles, but I don't want to show up in the Series D or Series E. I want to have early access to the best projects. And so I think folks that are in my situation, who are investors, they're going to want that early access, and that really means being present in Crypto Valley. There's effectively no substitute for it.
Switzerland's going through a great cultural and business change. The old model was we like the big companies and they're going to bring their money in. We have services set for that. But now there's actually a big undercurrent of entrepreneurship that's starting to develop. And Switzerland was never designed for this. I mean, just look at the capital requirements to set up an AG or a GmbH. It was too much, and it's just too complicated if you're a freshly minted entrepreneur with nothing. But what's happened is we're starting to see a big push at the government level and at the private level to actually have real entrepreneurship in the country. And suddenly it's becoming really the best place if you're an Italian, French, or German entrepreneur to set up your business. So if you're a VC, this is a good place for deal flow in the next 5 or 10 years. So there's a good reason to be here. Second, you look at the labor market again, that cannot be undervalued. Most of these cryptocurrency projects, their engineering core may be 5 people or 10 people. So it's not about quantity, and it's not something you can outsource to an outsource center like the Philippines or India or Ukraine. You're going to really need to use highly specialized local talent. And this is, again, one of the best jurisdictions in the entire world to find that talent or to get that talent to relocate. It's very easy for me to get a French engineer from Paris to Geneva. Super easy to do that. Much, much harder to convince them to move to Wyoming. So we're kind of dealing with that there. It's a bit of a culture shock. That said, it never was a mailbox for us with Ethereum. We lived here, Mihai and I and the rest of the gang. We even rented a house in Zug, and we all lived together in that house, which was a strange experience. And Ethereum does definitely have a footprint, as does Cardano. We have a very real foundation here. They're members of Zug. We hire Swiss citizens. My own research, we have 4 Swiss citizens who are researchers here who are all trained at ETH Zurich, either as graduates or postdocs. So we take it very seriously to have a real substance in Switzerland and create jobs here as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was effectively the difference. Like, I seriously considered Singapore. You know, I've been to China 23 times. I've traveled a lot in Asia, and there is a lot of capital there, but it doesn't have the depth of the engineering bench that I need to build the real intellectual property of a startup in this space. That's the difference.
Well, in terms of staying on top, what do you think it'll take for Switzerland to remain sort of in this position that they've carved out for themselves, especially as other economies start to embrace the industry and maybe, you know, put more weight behind, you know, friendly regulatory environment?
Well, I was just at the CFC. A lot of the folks here were there as well in St. Moritz, and there was a wonderful presentation by one of the head Swiss legislators, and they're putting forth a whole set of new laws this year that will give even more clarity about security tokens, recognizing in law, blockchain or ledger-based ways of doing shares, both registered and unregistered, and I think that's going to keep them ahead of the curve, right? Because that's part of this taking mainstream assets and putting them on the blockchain, which, you know, there are 500 trillion of, you know, traditional assets that we need to move on to this technology in the next 10 years. You know, that's going to set the stage, right? And so not only do we now have the startups, we're seeing exchanges launch, like Smart Valor. And so not only can you start here, you can build your team here, and then you can actually get listed in an exchange in Crypto Valley. So I think that's the evolution, is to have that full value chain here in Switzerland.
Yeah, that's a great question of, you know, how do we bring people in?
It's okay.
Huh?
You don't mind, right? We don't have 4 mics. So I could listen to what you're saying the whole night. It's so interesting. But people want to party later on. We're running over time here. I'm very sorry I have to interrupt. But maybe there's a last word from each one of you, and I'm going to disappear again.
Okay. Just real briefly, you know, there's a great model to follow. The Israelis are kind of known as a startup nation. In fact, there's a great book that's called Startup Nation that talks about it. And Switzerland would be wise to copy some of those techniques and practices. If you make this a great area for small shops to get started, build, grow, get liquidity, and then eventually move into larger marketplaces like Germany or the United States, then you'll have an endless supply of these types of startups. It really is hard to maintain a Microsoft-size infrastructure, so don't chase those things. Instead, chase the small ventures, and if you have 500 or 1,000 good exits every year, 500 to 1,000 collections of millionaires you're creating every year who probably are permanently located in Switzerland, and you make a very wealthy nation this way. So just good relationships with Silicon Valley, New York, other places, and get them to get their portfolios here, and then make sure that those portfolios can get liquidity early on through financial innovation. And then that's simply enough, and the entrepreneurs will do the rest.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But if you're sticking around, I'm sure everyone will be happy to get a chance to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Put your hands together for Charles, David, and Tracy. And by the way, guys,